Hello, I am Jamie Buckland with the West Virginia Pew Families United for Education. Um, and my internet is lagging, so I'm going to get this up. Hopefully, we're good to go. All right, great. Good afternoon. I have a stack of books here to go over with all of you. Um, and we're going to talk about using the Hope Scholarship to educate at home. I'm happy to also talk about traditional homeschooling submissions because there are similarities to the two. But basically, the objective of this, we're probably going to go for about an hour. The objective is for you to have a better understanding of what it means to satisfy the necessary criteria of the exemption that your child is under by submitting your assessment on time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah, if you have followed our work over the last year and a half, you've heard me talk a lot about compulsory education and being exempt from compulsory education. And so basically, the state of West Virginia says your kid has to go to school, right? And if in order for them to not be enrolled in public school, there are a series of different exemptions. They can enroll in a private school, and that school has to satisfy a list of criteria in order to have a satisfactory exemption. And then, if you are choosing to educate your child at home without any HOPE funding under the traditional homeschool exemption, you are required to assess every single year and submit those in grades 3, 5, 8, and 11. If you are using the Hope Scholarship and you're under exemption M as in Mary, you have two pathways that you can choose. You can use those funds to enroll back into a non-public school, or you can use those funds to educate at home under the individualized instructional program, which looks an awful lot like traditional homeschooling. The parent is using those funds to educate at home. But what we specifically want to talk about today is demonstrating progress, academic progress, in a way that you can submit to your county board of education to satisfy those requirements. So if you are a traditional homeschooler under exemption C, you didn't use Hope dollars to educate, you have until the end of June to get that submitted. If you're a Hope Scholar and you did use Hope dollars this year to educate your child, then you need to make sure that yours is submitted by June the 8th. So that gives us 6 business days, including today. Got a little bit of time today to get those submissions into your specific county. So I have 2 children that I am still educating at home. Easton is 6 and Elsie is 11. So they are going into first and sixth grades. So we're just coming out of kindergarten and fifth grade. And what I wanted to be able to do was help make some of these terms familiar and kind of give you an idea. Ideally, we would have done some of these back earlier in the spring, but of course, our operations were paused in that we were without funding, unable to do this work. So we're a little late in the game. There were some webinars that we did back in the fall and earlier this year about the IIP and the portfolio reviews. So hopefully this is going to be helpful to many of you who are like me. I still need to submit mine, who are you're still getting everything together to put it out there. So I'm going to start by talking about just kind of giving a framework on how to actually put together a portfolio review. If you have not done an assessment yet for your child, and with just 6 days to go, testing is not necessarily an option at this point. If they've already tested and you're waiting for scores to come in any day, that's a possibility. But if you haven't even had your child tested yet, then it's too late. So you're going to want to put together a portfolio in order to have that reviewed by a certified teacher. They do not have to be certified in West Virginia. So I'm going to start out talking about Easton. So this is for a kindergartner, and I'm just going to kind of give you some, lean back in my chair and get comfortable. I'm just going to kind of give you some information as far as from a homeschool mom perspective on how examples of ways that you can demonstrate their academic progress, and then the reviewer can take that. You might take photos of their work. You could capture some content on video. A lot of Easton's is going to be just video. You can take pictures of the actual workbooks and materials that you used. If you're doing an online live appointment with the reviewer, you might kind of help them interview your child if your child is comfortable with that. And some children like that opportunity. Again, these are just options that you may consider. And then they would be able to orally demonstrate some of their work from this academic year. So how you compile it is really up to you and the reviewer, and then demonstrating that to them. So for Ethan, we'll start at, again, there are 5 required subjects: math, language, reading, science, and history, or social studies. So if we start with just math for Easton, completing kindergarten, rising up into first grade, we focused on, and I am a better late than early educator. And I have no higher education. So I've graduated 2 homeschoolers, but the way that I've always approached this with my children is that we give them adequate space to remain curious, and then we really foster their confidence. So without any super intentional formal instruction, we began making sure Easton could tell his left from his right, and that he could begin to count, counting numbers and number identification, so that he could see a number and know the name that's associated with it. All of that feels very, basic, but again, it's his kindergarten year. And then just naturally adding, often with food. So it might have been pieces of popcorn or grapes or whatever. Just counting, adding, subtracting, place value, understanding. When you get 9 units and you add 1 more, you now have extended over into the tens. All of those basic principles, that's what we've worked on with Easton this year, very organically. So to demonstrate that, again, videoing him counting, videoing him working with blocks and putting them into like early division, into groupings. He's already picking up on multiplication, and he's turning 6, or he's turning 7 in the fall. But all of that is just naturally. We did not use any specific curriculum for Easton for math for kindergarten. So that's how we've approached it for him this year. For language, to satisfy the language arts criteria, a lot of oral narration. So we do a lot of reading aloud, and I would have Easton just tell me back what he's heard. There's a great book called Know and Tell by Karen Glass. It's from the method, the Charlotte Mason method or approach to education. And so once he has heard something, then he is asked to tell me what he has heard. And so that is where we focused on language, rhyming words, and oral narration. And so we would capture that and demonstrate that to the reviewer through video, mainly through video, because Easton has, he was a preemie, so he's got some processing issues, sensory processing. He does not love holding a pencil yet. And so a lot of his work has just been orally, which is fine. That's what works for him. Reading, identifying his alphabet, his sounds, rhyming words, again, beginning readers, just working with him. The main focus for him has been reading aloud. So I think a lot of parents get confused on like, how do you demonstrate that? You might just show a stack of books and say, I read these aloud. And then again, a video where you're asking your child, can you tell me, like one of Easton's favorite books is But First We Nap or something like that with the little sloth. And so I could ask him to tell that story back to in the video to demonstrate that he listened to that story and that he's learning some vocabulary through those stories. And those are ways that you can capture it. For science for Easton, we did a lot of nature study. And then at our hybrid homeschool community, we had an amazing tutor who did science experiments with him every week. And so he was exposed to a number of ideas for science this year. And I did take a lot of pictures and video to demonstrate that. But something that we did was using the nature readers. I'll put a link to these nature readers. For the kindergarten level, the nature reader follows the alphabet and it gives them some type of living thing for each letter. And so what we did for Easton, I'm wondering if I can show this to you here. So we did just a little mixed media book from Hobby Lobby, what have you. And then this was in the garden when we very first started our academic year. We had a fun pumpkin harvest that we hosted here on our hobby farm. And we went out in the garden, and this was his picture that he did watercolor on to show a tomato growing on a vine. So we were doing that with the kids. And then it starts, I think that might have been SpongeBob. Okay. So this was his first entry, A for alligator. Okay. And he was able to, at this time, I had somebody here helping me because I was working full time. Miss Rosie was helping with instruction here in the homeschool. But basically, the nature reader had a picture and a living story about that organism or animal or insect. And he would need to listen to the story, and then he would need to tell back what he heard. And so this is what Rosie was able to transcribe, dictate for him. The mommy alligator puts grass over her eggs to protect them. She waits in the water for them to hatch. If an animal tries to steal the eggs, she will use her sharp teeth to chase them off. And then he did the picture of the alligator. Okay. And then all the way through, we used this every single week. Here's a raccoon. Raccoon eat fish. They stay busy at night. A baby raccoon is called a kit. But he just went through and worked on this every single week. He got to the point where he was getting pretty frustrated with watercolor if the picture was more detailed. So he created this on reading eggs. And that's another thing. We did use reading eggs. We didn't use it very formally, but you could always print off the progress from reading eggs to include in your portfolio. And so this was that was his yak. So that was what we did for science for Easton's kindergarten. History was the story of the world. And I will say Easton, because of some of his sensory issues, he is not a huge fan of coloring. And so we had the Story of the World coloring book. The tutor at our hybrid homeschool program was amazing with geography. So here she was helping cover some of the Native American relocation trails and doing it with fun little wiki sticks. What are they called? I'm not sure. But you can see Easton was very much into a monochromatic presentation. So that's for history. We read Story of the World, and they did presentations. A lot of oral narration. So to put that together for a portfolio review, it would be video, or I could just ask his reviewer to watch this live and demonstrate that this is what we covered this year. And as far as forms, I'll get into that in a minute. I'm going to go on into Elsie. Elsie is going into 6th grade. So for math, we use teaching textbooks. That will be pretty easy for me. I can go in and print off or, save her progress through teaching textbooks. If your child is using a consumable material, you could always just take a couple worksheets, quizzes, or tests from earlier on in the year, and then some from later in the year, the end of the year. Again, you're showing progress. And I have this idea that, and I can't even remember where it came from, but that when you're educating your children, well, or whomever, when your children are being educated, it's less about covering material and it's more about like uncovering ideas. And so when I put together my children's portfolio at the end of the year, or if they test, I really try to just be encouraged that they have uncovered these ideas this year. And it's less about completing the books and what have you, and more just overall, generally, about what ideas you covered, what they explored, what was interesting to them, what they were curious about. And really, if you're keeping this work as as memories, because they're not going to have a report card to go through when they're 20 some years old and they're moving out and you're going through and finding all of their stuff. But if you're going to keep these, you want to be able to really demonstrate like the beautiful year that you had. All right, so that was math for Elsie. For language, for Elsie, we used, they both did Spanish this year as well. So I have that in addition to the language materials that we used. Again, a video, or Elsie did a lot of written work for her Spanish. But we used the Well-Ordered Language series from Classical Academic Press for Elsie. And so workbook style approach, I will just include some pictures of this, of her diagramming and how that's been graded. Very impressed with this, I must say. So if you're in the market for a language arts program, I have liked Well-Ordered Language from Classical Academic Press. For reading, so that would be the language part. For reading, we did an amazing series through Heritage Mom. I will link to her work. And she compiled this book list, and it was fantastic. It covered a lot of African American history in the early 20th century. So early to mid. So just like a book list, the books that you covered. Again, Elsie has a lot of written narrations. So she was telling back what she heard. And that's a very important skill to build listening. That we covered a lot of poetry. We used, my book is stuck here. We used A Gentle Feast for our poetry hymn study. And so there were a lot of poems that were already picked out for me. I didn't have to go and hunt those around, and they were committing those to memory. Easton actually does a really good job with recitation. So that's always fun to capture that for him. And so that's reading and language arts. Science for Elsie, she couldn't find her notebook, which is a problem. We need to find it. But we did a lot of cooking this year. Cooking is a great way to, and she wrote down recipes and measurements. She also had the amazing science tutor in class at ACA who did science experiments. And then we really started working on understanding the scientific method. She competed in a science fair this year and did a little chemistry experiment, a fair test on that. So understanding the scientific method, being able to articulate the different steps, being able to list out the materials, tell back the procedure, tell about the observation, put that information over into a chart for to demonstrate the conclusion. So all of those are skills that at upper elementary ages they're beginning to learn. And then lastly, for history, again, we did Story of the World. This was Easton's timeline book, but this is a timeline book or a book of history. I guess Elsie couldn't find hers on this either. But what we do for a timeline book is go through and mark, I can't tell what's in here. There we go. Go through and add, again, their tutor at our hybrid homeschool program did so much good work on this. She would have little cutouts, like clip art, and they would put that into their timeline book. So that's what we will use to demonstrate Elsie's history. She also did have a test booklet that we used for Story of the World. So a little more traditional, conventional, multiple choice stuff, which I'm not a huge fan of. We did it. I wasn't, it just showed me that she's probably going to be a lot like her older sister and that she's not going to love testing, which isn't surprising. But she does a much better job in just telling it back to me. So I really would encourage home educators to lean into the telling back of narration. Here is something from a nature study book of Easton's where he made a face, googly eyes. You could do so much with googly eyes. Okay, so that's the actual like compilation, right, of taking the work and putting it together. Pictures, video, demonstrating their progress. That's what you submit to the portfolio reviewer. I have a handful of reviewers that are taking appointments and still taking them now through next week. So now we're going to kind of get into that, how you satisfy. And I'm going to pull up to see if you guys are leaving questions because it is not coming up in my live here. So let me make sure that it's happening. Okay, I see it. But if you guys have comments or questions, just know that I am now plugged in, so I will see them if you comment on the Facebook stream. Been up since like 3:30, so going on 12 hours. Did try to take a 20-minute nap. It didn't work out for me. So my brain is like the executive function is fading, right? So we're going to get into actually putting that together and then submitting it. So you would work with a reviewer. Again, I've got a list. I'm going to put all of their information in the comments and compile a document, and I'll link to that. I'm starting to get red because I made myself nervous looking up, being on Facebook and making you guys wait. And everybody thinks like all this is like super, just easy for me, right? I am human too. So once it's organized, put together, you work with a reviewer. They're taking appointments, again, Zooms. Some of them are having you just submit it and do a phone call, whatever it is that your reviewer does in order to ensure that they have a grasp and an understanding of your child's progress. Another thing that you may want to consider is what I've always really appreciated when we have our reviews done is asking them for feedback to help me ensure that there isn't anything I'm missing. I have one of those books, like What Your Child Needs to Know When. I don't know that I've ever really put much time or effort into it, thinking about like CSOs. Just because I wanted to really educate my children in an unconventional way. And I didn't necessarily even want to, especially in younger years, to have that influencing how I instructed them. And I think that as you get older, when you start to put together transcripts and you start to think about college admissions, if that's where your child is headed, then you start to think more about, okay, have they grasped these concepts during this time, and can I put this on the transcript? Another thing is if your child is going to, some people are only homeschooling for 1 year. And so if your child is looking to go into school next year, you may want to ask the reviewer to really give you some feedback. Is this adequate? Is there something that maybe we should be covering this summer to get them prepped for next year? So I think that you could take different postures towards different approaches towards your portfolio review, and that if you're just looking to get, the boxes checked and submit that, I get that. But I have always really wanted to be sure that we're making the most of the experience, and that, yeah, I'm proud of the work that we've done, and I felt good about our year. Some years I felt better than others. Um, but I really wanted that feedback to make sure that there wasn't anything that we could improve upon. I'm always looking for ways to improve upon what we're doing. So one thing that you might want to consider in putting it together is, let's say, with the well-ordered language series that we used, also we used Latin for Elsie. And again, I told you guys about the Spanish, but you can go on the publisher site and look for the specs. If it's not easily found, you can always reach out to them, give them a call or email them. Like Elsie's language arts, what is set for 4th and 5th grade, right? She was just finishing 5th grade. It was level 2. You can go in there and see, and that might be something that you include in the portfolio to show, okay, this is the curriculum that we use. She's a 5th grader, and this was assigned for 4th and 5th grades. And here's a demonstration of the worksheets that she did. So you could always go to the specs to find those nuts and bolts, that information. If your child tested, and you've already completed that, there's been some questions about submitting test scores. And I looked around here. I'll include a picture of Ethan's test scores. I've been trying to clean my office, and I'm not sure where my folder of test scores are. We didn't test this year. But if you use testing, there's been some questions about submitting test scores and what you do for that. And it's a little confusing because you have traditional homeschoolers. If you tested through CHUV, whether you were a traditional homeschooler under Exemption C or you were a Hope Scholar under Exemption M as in Mary using the individualized instructional program, CHUV was great. I had worked with them last year, and they were willing to also test Hope Scholars. But they put out a composite document that has the average of each of those 5 scores, and then the composite of all of those. And it's an official, it's coming from them as a test administrator. And we have been able to submit those to the county to satisfy that as a traditional homeschooler, or for Hope Scholarship if it's coming from them. But as far as submitting your test scores as a parent, before we started using that as a homeschooler, I just always submitted my actual test score. And there are some differences in opinion on that. A lot of people feel like, do I really need to give the county all of that information? Right now, for Hope Scholarship, unless you tested with CHUV or WVHEA and you got a form from them, from a third party that lists your child's results, and it's official and it came from a third party, I would not feel comfortable advising you to submit anything other than your actual test results. Again, you can do that digitally. If you don't know which paper to submit, you can reach out to me. I can help you understand how you read the test results on what you need to submit to them. Our friends over at the Cardinal Institute, Amanda, did come up with a great cover letter that you could use in addition to submitting your test results, because it gives you a place to list your WEBIS ID number. And so if you need to find that, I'll get a link to that and put that in the comments as well. So that might be a great resource to use in addition to your test results, but not in place of your test results. We want to make sure that we are satisfying the law, again, satisfying the criteria for the exemption. In order for your child to be exempt from compulsory attendance, this is what you, the parent, needs to do. So if you tested, that's how you would submit it. A lot of questions about test scores for WVSSAC. Finally, tomorrow, I have been working on the SSAC stuff for weeks now since they put out their submission for administrative code. And so I'm finally going to get an update out. If you're not already on our email list for WVSSAC, email me, jamie@wvfub.org. Get a hold of me in some way to make sure you get on that list. But if you are if you have a child that is a Hope Scholar or a homeschooler that is going into seventh grade or up, they need to have been tested this year in order to be eligible for this coming fall. And so, or winter or spring, whatever program, in order to earn their eligibility, they do need to have tested this year. If you've got specific questions on that, you can reach out. I recommend CN Testing and the Stanford 10 or Iowa satisfy the criteria. Again, there are specific tests, it's specific years, seventh grade and up. If you have a rising sixth grader for WVSSAC, they have not required test scores to be submitted for rising sixth grader because they don't require academic demonstration of progress or requirements for our counterparts for public school students. So it wouldn't necessarily be fair to require that of a rising sixth grader that is under the Hope Scholarship or under homeschooling. And so when you submit those, there have been questions about the submissions of the form, whether you're using the portfolio review form. I'm recommending the Treasurer's Office has a sample form. It is not the official form. It is a sample form. We've had some counties say you can only use that form. That's not true. So if your reviewer has a form that they have come up with that mentions the code and has the WEVIS number and has their certification number as a certified teacher, it has all that information, and they want to use that, you want to use that, then who am I to say, no, you can't? I'm just saying it's a sample form. It needs to have that criteria on it. It needs to show that it needs to be stipulated that each subject has been demonstrated. There's been progress in each of the subjects. Once you have that together, how do you submit that? So we're going to wrap it up here. I might finish early because I'm not seeing any questions come through. But as far as the actual submission of your portfolio or your test scores, the long-standing guidance, and again, I'm headed into my 17th year of doing this. The guidance from Homeschool Legal Defense, our friends at HSLDA, had always been to send that certified receipt, right? You mail it off. You get the receipt so that when someone signs for that, you get it back. In 2019, I was appointed legislative liaison for the Raleigh Educational Association of Christian Homeschoolers, REACH, a support group down here in Southern West Virginia. And I had always kind of helped some families navigate issues that they were having at the county level. But then it really got intense because I was like the point person to help act as a liaison. And then we passed sports access. And so even more so, I will tell you that whether you got your receipt or not, the bulk of the issues that I have had when it comes down to communication and can my kid do this or did they satisfy the law, it has come down to submissions to counties, certified mail. And it's like, yes, you might have a receipt, but did they actually file that away? And there's been some confusion on notices of intent, and did they there was one situation where somebody had submitted a notice of intent a couple years in a row, even though they were only required to submit it once, and it came down to this discrepancy over the children that were included. And it was just this kind of a circus or a scavenger hunt of gathering all these information and these pieces. So in 2020, when counties started saying, hey, can you submit these digitally, HSLDA did come back and say, at this point, it's fine if it's a digital receipt. So since then, I have always advised that you email the communications with your county board, and then you keep those emails, you keep that documentation. So the question about submitting it to the superintendent, the state code says superintendent, but I will tell you that there are probably 3 or 4 out of the 55 counties where the superintendent is actually the person that is filing that away or processing that at all. In most of the counties, someone else is processing, and in many counties, they're processing both Hope Scholarship and the homeschool assessments and notices of intent. But in some of our larger counties, they have separate people so it's not even the same person. But what we did, because when we started work on this back when it was just the notices of intent early last year, we called all 55 counties and asked specifically, who would you like for these submissions to be directed to, whether it was a notice of intent or it was the portfolio review or test scores. And they told us who they wanted. And then throughout last year, we would call back and verify that. We had some volunteers that helped. I paid people to help do that. And so at this point, we are not publishing that directory because nobody has been on staff with the West Virginia Few to update and confirm all of that. So if you're looking for that information on who to submit it to, you just email me. The other assurance and the reason that we ask that you email me is so that we can cover our role in this. It's pretty vulnerable for us to be offering guidance and doing that liaison role, in that we want to make sure that we always are responsible in what we tell you is the most accurate, up-to-date information. And so doing everything through email, not on social media, allows us to ensure that it is directly to you, to no one else. We understand. Often I'll get an email and it says, hey, I just need that information on who to submit the assessment to. And I have to come back and say, well, what county are you in? They'll tell me their county. And then I come back and say, okay, well, are you homeschooling under exemption C or are you under Hope Scholarship exemption M? And there are all of that criteria we need to make sure. That's another reason that we don't give broad general guidance on Facebook to questions like this, because you might read it and not understand that it was that guidance was specific to one situation and not to yours. And so everything that we do here at the West Virginia Few is extremely intentional in reducing chaos and equipping parents and educating parents on these are all of the questions that need to be asked and answered before you make a move. And that way, once you make the move, it's solid and it's sound and you can take it to the bank, right? So that's why we're doing things the way that we're doing. If you're looking to submit your assessment digitally via email, all you need to do is email Jamie at wbfue.org, and it's Jamie, the male spelling of Jamie. And I will get you that information and you will get that submitted. And then we're just following up and making sure it's sent to the contact person and the superintendent, and that you are requesting a response back to ensure that it has been submitted and received. And then once all of that is done, you can begin thinking about how you're going to keep track of your work in the 23-24 academic year, so that this time next year, you'll be in love with yourself for keeping all of your information together and making it easier now that it's under your belt. So hopefully this was helpful. I don't have any questions that I see coming through. I'm sure they'll come in later. And I feel like I covered most everything that I wanted to cover. Again, Jamie with the West Virginia Few, we exist to remove barriers, guide parents, and support providers through the transformation of K-12 education in the Mountain State. And if this was helpful to you, keep in mind that we are running a Be the Key fundraising campaign throughout the end of June. Every single day, we're looking for 15 people to donate $15. That link will also be included in the information that I put out there. Again, if this was helpful to you, please consider donating $15 so that we can bring some staff back on as part of the team and ensure that we continue to bring you quality resources. That's all I've got for today. You guys have a great afternoon.